Cory Morgan, welcome to the Honest Report podcast.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the invitation.
We're very happy to chat with you. So, you were recently in Israel as a guest of the Exigent Foundation, which brings journalists and reporters and other scholars and observers to Israel to get a real first-hand look as to what's going on the ground. You were documenting a great deal of this on social media and at the Western Standard, of course. Even just before we get into some of the things that you've talked about and seen and documented, I wanted to get a bit of a sense in your mind as to what was the reason for going in the first place. What sort of prompted you to go?
Well, it was an invitation, and I was certainly thrilled to be able to. I mean, nothing beats getting to a place and seeing firsthand, speaking directly to people face to face to get a better perspective. I mean, this is a conflict and a war where the misinformation is spilling over here. Some of the conflict is spilling over here, but how do you get a clear picture without going there in person? So I was thrilled for that opportunity, and to be able to get on the ground and interact with other individuals and see scenes for myself really add a lot more depth to my thinking on what's going on over there. And I'm still processing a lot of what I saw.
So you were there for about a week. What were your broad perceptions before you went? Just even specifically, what were some of the things you expected to see and thought you would see before you went?
Well, I wasn't sure what to expect. I was hoping, I guess, again to see how people are living. I mean, I wanted to see how it's going to be in an area. It certainly let me know how good we have in Canada in a lot of ways. To go to kibbutz and down the south end of the country and see how bomb shelters are ubiquitous, and it's just a part of life living in a semi state of war that has its ups and downs like that. I wasn't sure what I'd see when talking to people. I guess people weren't casually dismissive of the state of affairs by any means, but it was also such an acceptance in living in such an unfortunate circumstance. Uh, Having that kind of confirmed, or just being able to just see how people live in that situation, and they're living, I guess, better with it than I would have anticipated.
And so, what were some of the most impactful things? I mean, you mentioned that you went to some of the towns and villages that were in southern Israel impacted by the October 7th massacres. For me personally, when I saw these places, I personally was struck by some of the savagery, which just stuck with me. And of course, a lot of that hasn't been documented in the news media that kind of, whitewashed a lot of that. Is that stuck with you as well, or what else was it for you?
Yeah, part of what really struck me was getting into kibbutz Kfar Azar or Azat, and that was about 3 miles from the Gazan border. They had over 60 people murdered there during October 7th, and seeing the damage to the buildings, but the area where it's intact, yet it's abandoned still. There's only a few people have moved back. So at first, the place it's beautiful. I mean, it's a nice. You'd think this would be a nice spot to retire. You've got kids parks, and you got the area where there's the little store and an ice cream cooler and things like that. You get closer and you realize everything's covered in dust because nobody's been there in that long. And then in a couple of years, so you've got this nice, almost suburban looking community, something that, in a tropical setting, but you could transfer to anywhere in Canada. Uh, then you go to the other end of town and see where the memorials are for the damage to the homes and the bullet holes and the grenade marks and the rocket marks from the savage attack on these peaceful people who are obviously just living in a quiet, peaceful family community. We knew this had happened. We had seen the news. We'd read the reports. We'd seen the interviews of people. But to get there and walk around and just see, and also having seen we did see that horrible video of Hamas and some of their own footage of what they did. Just really drives it home. It lets you never forget. It's not a foreign thing. It's not a distant fiction. This is a real event that really happened, because it's so unimaginable to us over here, and to see that wreckage uh, just gave me a bit more of a perspective of just how, as you said, how savage this was.
Now, of course, you didn't just go as an individual. You went as a journalist, putting on that journalist hat. When you were there, what were some of your observations vis-a-vis Canadian media coverage over the last couple of years? Did that cause you to reevaluate your perspective or your analysis of how that's been covered? Broadly speaking, in the last couple of years, did that make you understand how the media has been covering this a little differently?
Yeah, I had a low expectation already in having seen just the way some of our Canadian media covered it and soft sold what had happened over there. I mean, that there's one that sticks in my mind quite often because it's a Canadian example. It was a different kibbutz, but it was Vivian Silver, uh, an activist who was helping Palestinians, taking them for medical help, a left wing individual, a peace activist, and they for in reward for that they slaughtered her. But it wasn't just that had happened; it was that I don't know if you remember the CTV headline on that because she was missing at first until they found that the desecrated remains. And CTV reports that Vivian Silver, missing peace activist, found dead. They they didn't mention, not to mention, she was murdered. She was kidnapped. They made it sound like maybe she'd had a heart attack or a car accident or passed away in her sleep, and that's not a minor mistake. That's sugarcoating one of the most horrific terrorist incidents we've seen in world history or contemporary history, and that's the picture that Canadians were getting from what's over there. Uh, so yeah, to see firsthand the damage and some of the things that had happened there, speaking to people who had lost friends, family, and loved ones on October 7th, just I guess it added a bit more of even a sense of rage with what our media has been doing over here with regard to the whole affair over there.
No, certainly here at Honest Reporting Canada, certainly we've documented a great deal of this in the last couple of years. But as I said, for you, not just as an observer, but as a critic, what do you attribute this kind of anti-Israel bias or this laziness last couple of years? Is it that? Is it laziness? Is it an agenda? Is it malice? Is it malpractice? There's this just temptation to avoid controversy. You're always going to anger somebody. How do you make sense out of this coverage? When we see headlines at a CTV or CBC or the stories that they refuse to even call Hamas terrorists. How do Canadians make sense out of this?
I mean, I'm thinking maybe it's a trend of just broader media in general. Conventional media, of course, doesn't have the revenue, it doesn't have the size, it doesn't have the strength and diversity it used to 30 years ago, and that's not even their own fault. The world has changed. Newspapers are flyers now, and TV networks are, they're tiny. They don't have that reach, and they don't employ senior thinking writers or news anchors anymore like they used to, or people who come up with this sort of thing. What we've got is a generation that came through the universities that unfortunately have been dominated by some crazy radical activists, to be blunt. And these people are coming into the newsrooms and they're coming into those areas with this delusional vision of what before the October 7th even happened. They had that bizarre uh, context and vision of what's going on over there. So they felt it's almost their social justice role to try and change the perspective on what happened. That's the best I can come up for with it, because I don't know how some of these guys can sleep at night when we see the real raw footage. We know what happened over there. There's certainly lots of room for discussion. There's room for discourse. There's certainly room to be critical of the Israeli government and some of the responses. But it's when they try to undercut what actually happened, as you said, not even call them terrorists. They broke into residential areas and raped and murdered people. What else do you call that? And if you can't even call them terrorists, then we really, really have a terrible flaw in our coverage in general, but in particular when it comes to Israel.
So I want to quote a piece that was published on October 20th in the Western Standard about your visit. And I want to quote the piece, by the way. It's called Israel Isn't Going Away. And one piece that particularly struck me, and I can hear the frustration in your mind. And you basically, well, I'll read it here. Israel is imperfect as it may be, as a bastion of tolerance and democracy in a sea of dictatorships and theocracies. Over 18% of the population is Muslim, along with a couple 100,000 Christians. I'll pass through, it's a longer paragraph, a little bit here at the end. It serves as a sanctuary for many Muslims who had to flee their home nations due to their sexual orientation, due to the self-styled progressives who joined marches calling for the obliteration of Israel, everything for a second. What would happen to minorities if it became Palestine? There was a group called Queers for Palestine, so perhaps they really don't get it, end quote. So, I mean, this is one of the questions that's been asked again and again, not just over the last 2 years, but even before this, out of this sort of red-green alliance. Red, the hard, the hard left Marxist, the green, of course, Islamic radicals. How on earth, from your perspective, Cory, can we make sense out of this strange bedfellows?
I don't, as you said, there was confusion in my writing, and it remains with me. I don't know how you can bring about such cognitive dissonance with yourself to claim to be a progressive when that's the closest piece of progressive government and thought and living on the entire Middle East. The thing that really drove it home was walking in Tel Aviv at night down on Rothschild Avenue and seeing young people out, seeing art galleries, seeing people riding bikes, seeing people walking, seeing LGBTQ couples openly enjoying themselves, having a good time. To me, that sounds like a progressive paradise. Isn't this what you guys want to build everywhere? It's modest living, it's apartments, it's yet they want this obliterated. The closest I can come to is also the part of what comes to things. I mean, some of the battles on social media. I know some of the lunatics who come after me on X and so on. Often they literally do have a hammer and sickle in their profile. These are delusional people. I mean, we're not just talking communists. We're talking they're celebrating the Soviet system. They're not in the world of reality, and they oppose anything Western, anything. So they've set aside the reality of the human rights and the good parts and what's happened in Israel that you could hope would spread over into Jordan, into Lebanon, into Egypt, and maybe ease the lives of the people next door. And instead, they're chanting from the river to the sea, which, again, our media should be explaining to more people is a genocidal statement calling for the end of Israel as we know it.
So this is sort of the part as well where you have some people on the hard left, as you said, the hammer and the sickle, but then you have some other mainstream progressives who think that somehow it makes sense to them and they enable it. I mean, what needs to be communicated from your perspective, from mainstream perspectives and progressives to really shatter this whole settler colonialist endeavor nonsense and really who think that if Israel disappeared, that everyone would be singing Kumbaya.
Well, I think one of the things I took from there too that was interesting was looking at the history, even going to Caesarea, old Roman, ruins and getting into biblical times. And then, but you look at it, it was also possessed by the Ottoman Empire, it was possessed by the Crusaders. Borders are fluid in the Middle East. They're not static. You can call every culture a settler or a colonialist at one point or another. So we should be dealing with who's there today, where's the border now, and quit pretending that somebody has a higher claim than another due to some historical standing. I guess because there was a change in 1948. Yes, a dramatic one, but it is not as if Jews didn't have some sort of presence there prior. So, I mean, people are saying that nothing's valid because this was created in 48. Well, if we go back from 48, the borders were changing all over the place prior to then, too. So we could fight about that forever. If we really want resolution and peace, what they keep talking about, and that was part of what my piece was about, too, they better accept and understand, though, Israel isn't going away. The Jewish state isn't going away. There may be room for things like a two-state solution of some sort. I'm not sure how. The West Bank is such a mess, all sorts of issues. But you've got to start this discussion from the fact that Jews have been chased all over the planet for millennia, and they're back in Israel, and they aren't moving this time. They are not backing off. They're not going out. I mean, that's what was learned in 47, 48, and that's what has to be learned going forward. So let's start the talks under the understanding that that part is not changing in the near future, and let's see how we can accommodate beyond that.
So you came back with these observations. What do you think it's going to take Canadians, whether it's news media outlets who won't call Hamas terrorists, or whether it's politicians who don't have a backbone? What is it going to take for Canadians, millions of them, to stand up and recognize and call a spade and call a terrorist a terrorist, and understand that Israel, as imperfect as it may be, is not the cause of all the problems in the Middle East and the world?
Well, Canada, for one, has to bring in order and bring in civil discussion. I mean, they've been letting this go. They've been letting it get to the point of violence on our streets, to intimidation out there. And we should be laying down the law right off the bat. That is not where this is going to happen. This has to stop. No more riots. No more breaking into private meetings. No more intimidating neighborhoods. No more marches blocking streets. We can have a discussion. We can open up on this. But so getting beyond the media and the rest, our own state is what's supposed to be a civil society has to get this in order and say this is not the way we're going to do that here. we're not going to tolerate that. And right now, yeah, we're nowhere near that. I'm just looking at something. Just this came in 20 minutes ago before we started talking on my X. For an example of the misinformation and how they're framing things, the TSU incident where there was a private gathering of some people off of the university campus. A bunch of masked thugs broke in, smashed the windows out, and they got pushed out by a gentleman who had worked with the IDF. This is a tweet at me on it. People are worried. They're saying this is the reason that they're protesting in Jewish neighborhoods. They said people are worried about the safety of women and children in the neighborhoods. An IDF terrorist attacked children at a school in Toronto. Is he hiding in that neighborhood? Like, what a ridiculous load of baloney. But when these incidents break out, and then we're allowing these extreme groups and people like this to try and frame what happened unchecked, the public at large gets confused or disconnected, or again, it just gets lost altogether. So I think the first thing we have to do, though, is get order on the streets. No more violence, no more threatening, no more intimidating. We don't do that. We're a civilized society, and then we'll work at it from there.
All right. Thank you so much, Cory, for your time and really unmasking not just, of course, your own experiences here, but what we've seen in the last couple of years in terms of media malfeasance, laziness, whatever you want to call it, and the broad tolerance, a lot of disinformation. I appreciate your time and expertise sharing with us today. Thank you again, Cory.
Well, thank you. I'm happy for the invitation, and I appreciate the work you guys are doing.